Okay, well, how about we get things underway? Appreciate everyone's patience. I'm sure there'll be others that'll be dialing in here, and but let's begin the webinar now. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're here today to talk about how to make theory reality and working with you to understand and help you understand how bus fleets will be you're able to deploy them from an EV infrastructure side. So. Yeah, let's launch right in and let's talk about a couple of housekeeping items. And so my name is Matt Kerwood. I am from Voltera. My responsibility at Voltera is to oversee the bus division within our organization. So we'll be covering five key topics today in discussion with our panelists, who I'll introduce here shortly. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you could please just remain muted, and then if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat, and we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation and the panelists. So we'll be able to answer all of those. But if there is a question that you feel like you need to address, feel free to raise your hand in the chat, and we'll get to you right away. But yeah, we'll be working through the five topics, and as I said, I'll introduce you to the panelists here. Voltera, just as a quick overview, who are we? What do we do? Effectively, we are a one-stop shop for EV infrastructure for fleets. We cover a range of different types of fleets, from bus, which is what we're here to talk about today, but we also cover other markets such as heavy-duty trucking, shared ride, last mile delivery, and also what we call branded networks. So what we do is we effectively provide all of the capital, all of the necessary financing for you to implement EV infrastructure as a solution. This includes both on your existing premises or at a remote site that we will go ahead and purchase and build things out to spec for you. So we will handle the entire process from working with the utility, handle all the engineering, the permitting, the build process, and then the actual management of the site for you. So it's a full spectrum of services that we provide. And yeah, so let's get into it, and let's start to introduce our panelists. So going from left and right here, we're joined by Brian Shaw. Brian Shaw is the Executive Director of Stanford Transportation. Brian's someone who brings a lot to the table here as far as experience goes. He's got first-hand account of actually implementing EV infrastructure for his campus, and a great resource for all on the call. Next, we have Javier Hernandez, who is the Director of National Sales at Gillig. Javier's been in the industry for a number of years, a lot of experience, and heavily involved in fleet transitions and bus sales for Gillig over to EV. I've already introduced myself. We've also got Jeremy Brown, who works within the bus division of Voltera. Jeremy's experience also before Voltera includes working for Transdev. So the third-party operator understands the dynamics of what it takes to provide the operations and support for these facilities and for these daily operations. And then lastly, we've got Jeff Gunn, who's also from Voltera. Jeff comes with a wide range of experience from an engineering side. He oversees our engineering program at Voltera and has implemented a number of infrastructure projects for transit authorities, transit agencies, and various EV bus programs throughout the US. So yeah, let's jump right in. So we're going to start off, and we're going to lead with Javier from Gillig. And what we're going to talk about here is the steps to properly spec your EV bus. There's a lot of considerations you need to factor in when you're coming to this decision. And so Javier is going to lead off with some advice and some guidance as to what you should be thinking about. And yeah, why don't you take it away, Javier?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, there's a lot to consider when bringing EVs into your fleet. You know, what you need it to do, what do you expect it to do, and what can it do. So obviously starting with the battery size considerations is key. Knowing what level of energy you think you're going to need, really, is it miles or is it hours? That's becoming a big thing too, where some customers may need it to operate for 20 plus hours of the day, and they're going very few miles. And opposite, some customers are plowing through a lot of mileage, and maybe not hitting the hours on a daily basis. But battery size is key. You want to make sure you have enough onboard energy to do what it is you're looking for the bus to do. So some of the other things to consider here, what you have listed, we got the weather and geography. We have some warmer climate region customers that are absolutely benefiting from just that. The heat is a big energy consumer, where the colder climate regions really get hit hard in the winter months. Um, we've got out in Honolulu, there may be at 1.7, 1.8 kilowatt hours per mile because of the weather, where they're just taxing the HVAC unit and the AC. Where you get up into the Northeast and you're north of the 2.2, 2.3 kilowatt hours per mile with the heat in the winter months. So it really has a big impact, especially when you're reaching out. If you're reaching out for from data, or if you're just looking to your peers, it's great to look outside your region, go nationwide for experiences outside of just performance, whether it's who your OEM is, your technicians, mechanics experience, but also stay within your region so you get real data that's applicable to what you're doing and experience. Um, service hours and mileage considerations. That's something we talked about earlier on as well too. Um, we've done demos throughout the country since we've launched our EV, and I can tell you, we've been at idle for 5, 6 hours of the day straight out in the middle of a parking lot with the AC running, and we'll drop, maybe 3% state of charge just running the AC. You flip that as we're coming into the fall and we get into the colder months, and we run that same demo with the heater on, and you'll drop 20 plus percent state of charge just by trying to keep in the interior warm for the passengers. So it's certainly something you want to consider, your service hours, what you needed to do. Um, Charging provisions has always been a little tricky. The bus is only going to take so much energy, and that's for every OEM. You're going to want to protect the batteries. The batteries have to stay in a sweet spot for warranty conditions. You have about a 1, maybe 2.5 degree swing. Um, so if you go with the high-end charger, you may not always take advantage of that high-end charger, where the bus may be only taking 120 kilowatts of energy at a charge rate. But it's key, and key is what Voltera is part of that package, what you guys can offer and what you can do, walk customers through that algorithm, see what they need to do. But it's very, very important to understand what your charging needs are. Don't just fall for a simple, I'm going to go get the biggest and the best and the greatest and then overpay, and then you're not going to utilize it. Or on the flip side, you go out on the lower side and you end up with the 60 kilowatt, 65 kilowatt charger and just not meeting your needs. So you definitely want to make sure you're talking to the experts and do a lot of testing and see where you need to be for that sweet spot, and also part of your fleet size, what you're looking to do and when you're looking to charge. Um, Big one here, with the diesel fired heater. We just got through, we saw you guys there, Matt and Jeremy, at the ZebCon, which is a big zero emissions conference. Um, and it seems to be a political push, whether you can run a diesel fired heater or not, if it's tied to emissions. But one of the things I'd mentioned there was to just listen. There is a smart spec. There are some nuances to the electric bus that you should consider that's not like a conventional diesel. There are some things you may have to do different and spec different in order to get the optimal performance. And when you're owning this equipment for 12 years, you absolutely should be looking at all avenues to make sure you're positioning your organization for success long term. The diesel fired heater for us is an absolute in the cold climate regions. I wouldn't even consider it a range extender so much as a range retainer during the winter months. But we understand, we at Gillig, we understand there's a lot of political where someone doesn't say want to run a diesel fired heater in the winter months, but it's minimal is what I tell people. It's very minimal, and the amount of emissions that you're going to be putting out is immeasurable over a 3 to 5 month period, depending on where you're at and what your regulations are. California is a little different. CARB doesn't have an approved diesel fired heater, but that's just the move on the West Coast here.
So Javier, I'm going to ask Brian a couple questions. So Brian, as an operator, would you have any words of wisdom for anyone who's considering a diesel bus specification?
Well, I would treat a bus procurement no different and figure out what your needs are. And then figure out if an electric bus fits it. You know, in some cases, you may have to go that direction, like out here on the West Coast, we have to bake that into the calculus. One is to compromise your ability to serve your customers because you're trying to put into a fuel type that others are imposing upon you. Electrics can work, and we use them very well here at Stanford. But as Javier said, you know, we kind of have like the perfect set of conditions here to facilitate that. And, you know, we don't have to use the heaters very often, for example, because, you know, we don't get super cold temperatures. We don't run them hardly at all. That helps with the range being maintained, like Javier said. So, you know, do your route planning, do your fleet planning as you always have done it. Then work with folks like at Gillig and Voltera and others that can say, well, here's how electrics might fit into that. Because at the end of the day, the people riding the bus just want to get from where they are to where they want to go. And that's what's important to them. And that's what I always keep in mind. And if the electrics can meet that need, great. And then do all the other things we're going to talk about today to make that work. But I'm not a big square peg and a round hole guy. And so in some cases, with what we do today at Stanford, there is not an electric that will meet everything that we do. And that's okay. At some point, that will be the case. And when it is, great. But today, there are key aspects of what we do that we are not using electrics, mainly for longer distances that need to traverse the highways. And so those are still being used with conventional diesel powered motor coaches. But at some point that may change. So know what you need to do and then work with smart people to figure out if an electric can fit into those needs. And I wouldn't compromise your operations just to go electric. You need to make sure that that will be what you're trying to actually do for your people.
I think that's really well said, Brian. I think that was actually some of what I was going to say for one of the key takeaways for this particular segment is really understanding your operations and the route structures and specifically how EVs can fit in and provide you with solutions for those routes. And so sometimes we don't necessarily come up with a solution that's going to be 100% EV for a specific operation, but looking to find ways where you can implement EVs and where you can as much as possible is a great way to approach it, at least initially. And really then drawing on the experts and bringing in an OEM partner who can really assist you to do your due diligence as early as possible in the process. So you really have a firm understanding of the solutions that you can apply. And then you can start to move into your infrastructure piece of the planning. So I think once you have that vehicle piece understood, it doesn't necessarily mean that means you go out and order it, but that means that you have a good plan of when you're going to order it, and then tie that in with the infrastructure piece, which we're going to talk about next. And you're heading off on the right direction. So I think with that, let's jump into the second phase of the conversation here, and we're going to bring in here Jeff Gunn, and Jeff's going to talk to you a little bit about how as it says here, it all starts with power, and it's such a critical piece, as Jeff's going to explain to you, and it's also something that really requires some research and understanding of how that process is going to work. So Jeff, how about you take it away?
Sure, thanks, Matt. So once you go through all that initial route planning and understanding, what the buses are going to be doing, how they're going to support your operations, you'll know what size batteries you need, how much energy you need to move from the grid into those batteries, what times of day your vehicles are available for charging. And then all that together will really tell you how fast you need to charge the vehicles, and then in aggregate, how much power you need to bring to your site. And what we found is that when you electrify an entire fleet or even a good chunk of a fleet, the energy that you need is generally far and away bigger than what you would have for a typical bus depot or something like that. Typically for these buses, we're looking at charging them between 60 and 150 kilowatts. Often we'll do some much faster top-up chargers, 450, 500 kilowatts, that kind of thing, for like a midday top-up, or in case you need to get something in an emergency in the morning. And what that means is that altogether, you're going to probably need something between 2 and 20 megawatts to feed your bus depot. And, you know, today's opening day of the football season, so I kind of looked this up. A typical NFL stadium, their peak draw is somewhere less than 10 megawatts. So you can think about what we're trying to do here is to put in, you know, 1, maybe 2 NFL stadiums wherever your existing sites are, and getting that infrastructure in can be very challenging if it's even possible. So once you've looked at the buses, once you understand how much power you need, the very first thing you need to do is engage that utility. You're going to need to talk to them early and often throughout the whole process to make sure that they can bring the power that you need to site. The very first thing you do is you usually go in and you do a load request and you say, this is my project, here's how much power I bring. They'll go off to a study, they'll figure out where they might get that power from, what it might cost, what the schedule will be. We've had projects where they come back and say, we can get you power in 6 months. We've had projects come back where they say, we can't get you power until 2030. So understanding that timeline is obviously a very important thing. As part of that discussion, you want to talk about how your fleet may phase and grow over time, so that you don't just engage with them maybe on that worst case peak load scenario, but what is that first, second, and third phase going to look like, and how might they change what they're providing as your fleet grows. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. But then once they go through and do that study, then they need to do all of their engineering on their side of the house. Then they need to do a whole construction project, and then the energization. That whole process, is easily 18 to 24 months is kind of what we plan for. As I said, sometimes it's much longer. And sometimes it's not possible, or extremely expensive. We're talking millions of dollars sometimes to bring it to your site. So you want to understand feasibility of that very early on. And since obviously the utility players are such kind of key people in this process, we always have a very regular and frequent engagement with them. We like to do kind of like bi-weekly meetings with all of the utilities that we're working with, just to run through all of our projects, make sure we're clear on whose ball or whose court the ball is in right now, whether they're doing engineering or they need some information from us, making sure that we're up to date on timelines, and really trying to get visibility in as quickly as possible to see if there's going to be changes to the schedule. Because ultimately you can finish everything on your side of the fence, and if you don't have utility power there, buses arriving, you're going to be in a big trouble. So making sure that you get the utility sorted and really manage them, as opposed to letting them manage you, is we found critically important. There's also a lot of utilities have rebate or cost sharing programs, and understanding what those are early is very important. Some of them have very specific requirements. For example, some of the utilities, in order to take advantage of the EV rebate, you can only feed electric vehicle chargers from that service. So we'll actually bring in a whole separate electric service to the site to feed lighting and buildings and receptacles and that kind of thing. And designing your electrical infrastructure around the utility rebates can really make sure that you can take advantage of those rebates. And in a lot of cases, they can be quite lucrative. Again, we're talking potentially millions of dollars. So you want to make sure you understand what their requirements are right at the get-go, and then build those into your design and your approach so that you can take advantage of it. It's really hard to come back at the end and address things for that. And then there's also kind of major long lead equipment that you need to buy. We find a lot of our equipment, chargers and switchboards and things like that, are the better part of a year lead time. So we typically will go, and we've kind of built some standardized designs, so we know where we're going to end up, and we can go and procure that equipment in advance, even before we finish final design on a project. And that really helps us move much more quickly, so that we can deploy things in much shorter schedules. And so understanding what that long equipment is, engaging in early procurement of it, is all very important. There's some challenges there if you start buying equipment before you've finished your designs, and that you need to make sure that you're buying the right thing and that you've thought about all of the details for that. And that's something, again, that we do an awful lot of. And then the last thing when we're talking about power is understanding resilience and how you're going to deal with grid loss, right? It's much more difficult to store electricity on site than it is diesel fuel. And so you need an approach and a strategy on how you're going to address that. And we've seen a wide range of things from maybe the early days, if you've only electrified a few buses on site, your contingency plan might be if you can't charge those buses, you're going to deploy more diesel buses that day. We've looked at other things like operational changes. Maybe you have some routes or some frequencies that are less critical, and you can operate a kind of a reduced service for a period of time. And then we've also gone to like full-scale on-site backup power with diesel generators sometimes, microgrids. We're talking solar energy and battery storage and all these things together to really provide kind of 24/7 resilience for a site. One thing I do want to say is we talked a little bit about diesel on the heater side. You know, we've looked at carbon impacts from incorporating diesel generators. And if you put in a diesel generator that's going to run for your testing and then maybe a 2-day outage out of the year, that's your overall fleet is still going to have like a well over 98% carbon reduction. And so, you know, putting in a little amount of diesel generation to make sure that you can get the resilience you need is not necessarily a bad thing and isn't something that you know, people should necessarily shy away from. Should be considered along the whole project, but it can be a very good way to meet the resilience needs that you have. And I know, Brian, it would be good to get a couple of real life examples from some of your considerations.
Yeah, we have done most of what Jeff just talked about, and have had to implement some of those when the needs presented themselves. Those of you who are familiar with the Bay Area, Northern California, know that we have challenging environmental conditions that will preclude power being distributed under whatever the condition is, whether it's wildfires, public safety power shutoffs when it's too windy and they're worried about the power lines getting compromised, etc. And we are on grid power at Stanford, even though we provide a lot of solar power generation that goes into the system. The power coming to Stanford is still grid-based. And so we're subject to those situations. And they have happened on multiple occasions in the time that we've been running electric buses. And so we've had to put into place the various pieces that Jeff talked about. We have a contingency plan where we can triage our operations based upon how much service we still have available with the electric buses. And we anticipate the power being unavailable to those vehicles. We have maintained a cadre of diesels in our fleet, as I mentioned a little bit before. Those can be employed on a, you know, as much as we possibly can. They essentially act as our backup system, as our backup generators are those diesel buses. We haven't gone to some of the power augments that Jeff talked about. We are thinking about that. There's a project that's being developed with our energy lab at Stanford to create essentially what would be a giant solar charged battery pack that would be used to mostly offset our use of grid power, you know, just reduce that to some percentage. But when we have a power disruption from the grid, we could use that to buy us time until the power comes back. So we are anxiously awaiting for that project to get together to help us, and we are supporting it as much as we can. It went from being just a green-based project of reducing grid power to it being a resiliency play, which is you know, critically important as well. So yeah, you need to be doing that work that Jeff talked about in parallel to what your needs are from getting the power. Because unfortunately, at least in certain parts of the country, and I work and live in one of them, the grid power is not available 100% of the time. And so you got to be thinking about these issues. Hopefully you never have to implement these plans or these options, but you do yourself a misservice if you don't. And we are prepared when, not if, but when the power is disrupted to the campus.
That's great. Yeah, excellent feedback, excellent advice. So yeah, just I think there's some takeaways listed here from what we just talked about. I think in summary, one of the things that really stood out for me was that you really have to start early and engage frequently with your utility. I think that is a key takeaway here as far as really understanding what the process is, so you don't face any surprises, and just formulate that relationship and really stay close as you work through the process. And as Brian just pointed out, making sure that you formulate backup solutions, backup plan to create stability throughout the operation as you move forward. So, okay, how about we move into the third topic here, which is, let's look at the site itself and building it out for the long-term success. And we're gonna stay with Jeff here, and Jeff's going to talk a little bit about this program as well. And so, Jeff, take it away.
Yeah, so as you look at how you're gonna scale your fleet conversion, you need to consider the infrastructure needs, both on like a site by site, so like what does each individual site need, and then also a system-wide approach, if in particular if you're operating more than one site. For example, phasing construction projects in active bus depots can be very challenging. I don't know anybody or I haven't yet met anybody who said their bus depot is too big and they have lots of extra space. Usually you're struggling for space on those, and so getting a construction project to come on site and put all their lay down there and take parts of the site offline can be very challenging. And so we're actually starting to see a lot of larger transit operators who maybe have done like an initial few buses to kind of get their feet under them a little bit, and then rather than doing 10% at every single fleet, they're actually taking one whole facility and converting that. And in a lot of cases, because the phasing is so challenging and the space, the depots don't have the space for all of the chargers and electrical equipment and everything that you need, we're seeing them build ground up new facilities in new locations. And so that's one way to address kind of like your large scale phasing, is to look at opportunities to put new sites in, how those can support your existing route operations or augmenting your route operations, and building things that are really ground up bespoke for BEBs. The other thing you can do as part of that is a lot of utilities will actually work with you to figure out where they have capacity. So I was just talking about how challenging it can be to get utility capacity. If you have flexibility for where your site can be a little bit, that's one way to really de-risk that and actually work with the utility and figure out where do they have 10 megawatts, where is that substation with capacity, et cetera. That said, there's an awful lot of people who have one facility or don't necessarily have the opportunity to build a whole brand new facility. So as you do your work on your facilities and you grow the amount of battery buses on that one facility, it's very important to make sure that you plan for the end condition. You don't want to go and do one project for a few chargers and then another project for a few chargers and another project for a few more, and then all of a sudden find out that you've now hit your service capacity or your equipment is no longer big enough or that it doesn't fit. And so what you want to do is look at what that full build out is, what the right way to feed all of those chargers and install them and put them throughout the facility, and then start to work your way back to align your infrastructure with your vehicle procurement schedule. I've seen a lot of people, they'll lay out a vehicle procurement schedule, they'll convert to, they'll do that first couple of tranches, and then they'll actually start to accelerate because they find that they really like the battery electric vehicles and they'll start to move a little bit quicker. And so that's the other spot where having your infrastructure kind of modular and ready to go makes a lot of sense. For example, if you're doing a very big bus depot, you're probably going to need a large medium voltage service to be able to get that 10 megawatts that we're talking about. And your first phase may not really need all of that. But if you put that equipment in right at the beginning, it will make connecting phases 2, 3, and 4 much easier. It will reduce the downtime you need. It'll streamline all of that construction in an existing depot that we were already talking about. So it's very important to think about it holistically and understand the steps, how the steps for your bus procurement align with the kind of natural step changes in your infrastructure and your procurement for the infrastructure, and try and always have that infrastructure a little bit ahead of or designed in a way to support the oncoming buses.
Sorry, Jeff, I was just going to pull in Javier here, if you don't mind. Just one of the pieces of feedback we got from Gillig in an earlier conversation was that 25% of all bus deliveries have actually made, and the infrastructure's not ready to go with that bus delivery. Is that, Javier, can you expand a little bit on that and just lining up with what Jeff just mentioned as far as how that represents a challenge for your customer and how to pull in and create a solution when a bus is getting delivered?
Yeah, it's pretty rare in today's world where well, let me take it back. It's common in today's world, very rare, and it used to be, where you're having two major projects happening within the same year. So it used to be the bus purchase was the largest capital purchase and a customer was going to make, and now they're dealing with charging infrastructure or getting ready, as Jeff had mentioned here. But yeah, I can't express how important it is to ensure that you have the ability, your infrastructure is set, and you're ready to go before buses show up. So many delays have happened over the past couple years that customers come back saying, hey, we can't have 5 buses, 10 buses, 15 buses sitting without the ability to charge, or maybe they didn't make phase 2, or to Jeff's point, they just didn't plan properly for expansion or long-term expansion. Bus site's still easy for most of the OEMs. We could have a bus on site now. You're talking electric buses, 18 months, 16 months, 20 months. That's the easy part. Once you go into production, it's pretty much a finite number. But to have everything in play, man, it's so key to the success of the fleet and the customer, to make sure that that infrastructure is up and running, because you can't expedite that. If you're in a delay for, breakers or whatever it may be, or just the charger itself, you're just in a long-term holding pattern.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, feel free to continue on. But thanks, Javier. That was well said.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, we actually, some of our circuit breakers are our long lead time on equipment. So we've actually pre-purchased them and they're all sitting at our switchboard manufacturer's warehouse ready to go into our equipment. And that reduced our lead time on equipment by like 20 weeks to make it much more nimble.
That's great.
I think the only other thing is just thinking about, this isn't a one-time purchase for most people, right? You're gonna grow a lot over time, and understanding how your technology choices are going to evolve over time. Trying to talk to the vendors, in particular your EVSE or your charger vendors, trying to talk to them, understand how their equipment is going to evolve over time, what their pathways for product development are is really important. In the past, I've worked with customers who have bought a charger for, a dozen chargers for a few vehicles, and then 6 months later gone to buy more chargers, only to find out that, from the same vendor, the next generation of chargers are no longer compatible with the charge management system for the old one, or things like that. So really trying to make sure that you keep all of those systems as open as possible, allowed to use, so that you can have vendor A communicate with vendor B, and then also try and make sure that you're working with people who have long-term commitments to kind of keep accessibility to hardware is very important. The chargers are going to need frequent firmware updates over the whole life cycle and things like that. And you want to make sure you get into a position where you can use things for the whole 10 or 15-year life cycle.
Nice. Yeah, well said. Well, yeah, I think there's a number of key takeaways here. I think Jeff really hit on a lot of very important points. I think that the end goal in mind is something that is a real standout for me, as far as it's really important to understand what the end goal is, and to plan accordingly for that. And this phase-in solution is often a great way to enable not only the implementation of your fleet, converting it over to EV, but from a finance standpoint, from a capital standpoint, it can also help as you're procuring your equipment to line that up also with the implementation of the infrastructure. So all in all, I think building it out, the future proofing of your infrastructure is really, really critical. And so, yeah, thank you, Jeff. And let's move on. So we've got the next topic we really want to talk about is, now you've actually got to the point, you've procured your vehicles, you've worked with the utility, got power to the site, you're building your site, and now you have a fully fledged operation. Let's talk about the benefits of a managed site solution. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Jeremy. And so Jeremy, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. I would say, just from my 20 years of experience in the transit contracting space, and I'll add Brian a little bit into this, is one of the things that's generally being overlooked as an industry is, how do you manage your site? How do you keep your uptime on your charging network in real time? Because generally what has happened is the chargers get installed, and then there really isn't a thoughtful plan as to how you're going to manage that moving forward. depending on the size of organization, some organizations have a lot of resources that they can put at that, and some really, really don't. So the benefit you get with a managed solution, and I would encourage people as they start to plan to really think about this, is that you have a cloud-based type system with Voltera called Voltera Cloud, and it actually monitors your charging system and stations individually to make sure that there's real-time monitoring and a rapid response to repair or address any issues that might come up. The whole point is to ensure that you have a high level of uptime on your site, and that you aren't plugging a vehicle into a charging station that may not be working. So it allows for you to optimize your responsiveness and keep that critical uptime that your customers demand out there. You also have the ability to have that 24/7 customer support. Now, we're not suggesting a managed site has somebody standing there, 24/7, but at least you have resources and a team of people that are experienced from 30, 40, and 50 sites that can help you identify the issues and remedy them much, much quicker than you would be able to do so on your own. Additionally, there is sometimes communication interface issues that may come up between a Gillig bus and the particular charger you've selected. So having those experts in place to help you remedy those things quickly is really, really important. The other thing you really benefit from is you're able to adapt as you grow. So ensuring that all of the systems are working properly with the fleet that you've selected over time helps you with the managed site solution and ensuring that things go properly. You also have a little bit better data analytics to understand how your managed site is operating. It analyzes data from energy consumption, station usage, and all of the key metrics that you really need as an operator to be mindful of and understand how everything is performing, and if it's not performing well. It also ensures that there's better predictive maintenance for issues that are known to fail, and they can be addressed in a proactive versus a reactive manner. And ultimately, it provides you greater financial predictability, because a lot of times these service agreements consolidate maintenance, repairs, and software updates into the program that gives you a little bit more of a predictable financial model. Brian, I know you've gone back a long way, all the way back about 10 years now, I think. How would you suggest that people apply towards a managed site versus a self-perform?
Yeah, if we had the ability to have our electric bus area managed by a group of folks who were experienced in that space, we would probably have done that, but it didn't exist when we built our facility back in 2016. So we've had to learn how to do it ourselves and partner with our bus operators on that, and with our bus OEM BYD. And it's a lot of trial and error to get it dialed in. I think in general, the maintenance, the upkeep, the reliability of EV charging, whether it's for buses or regular vehicles, whatever it is, it's a growing area of concern that is only beginning to be thought about and professionalized. And I have challenges with my regular vehicle chargers, and we're struggling dealing with those. The buses, it's less so because we just have more experience and we have focused effort on it. But yeah, if there's folks out there who can help you with this, I would say avail yourself to that, because unlike, say, other fueling you're doing that you probably have a third party involved in, if you don't bring someone else in, you're responsible to keep those chargers up and running, and there's no substitute for them. You need them to get those buses back on the road. So it's an area of expertise that, like I said, is only beginning to become something that people specialize in and understand at a deeper level. And fortunately today that's happening. And I wish that 10 years ago that was an option, but we had to design, build, manage, implement everything ourselves. And I don't recommend that as the path for anyone to follow in 2024, if you can avoid it.
Yeah, there's a lot here we could unpack. I think one of the things that Javier pointed out earlier, and Jeff, maybe you could expand on it, is picking the right charger solution for not only necessarily, I think Javier pointed out, not necessarily getting the most expensive or the one that brings the most power, or not looking at the cheapest option, finding that right solution that's going to fit the operation. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a managed solution, like the importance of ensuring that that charger is and its uptime is there. So Jeff, just also before you go there, I also want to add that you really have the ability when you formulate these contracts with your infrastructure provider, with your charger provider, to really look at building in SLAs and hold accountability for charger uptime, making sure there is proactive rather than just reactive solutions in there and accountability for that, so that you're really ensuring that you're giving yourself the best chance for uptime. So, yeah, sorry, Jeff, if you just want to expand a little bit on that, that'd be ideal.
Recording
Yeah.
in progress.
Yeah.
We are back from closed session early for a change.
Anyway,
I think we got someone. If someone wouldn't mind going on mute, that'd be great. Thank you.
so, yeah, we have an entire team that basically looks at chargers to onboard for us to use, and they have a very detailed process looking at communications for the chargers. What data can we get in, what data can we get out, how will they tie into our remote cloud management system, what are their on-site service times, what can they debug remotely, what percentage of tickets can they address remotely versus having to do a truck roll. That's a big one. Even simple things, I was talking about firmware earlier, right? Some chargers will automatically push out firmware and there's nothing you can do. All of the vendors that we onboard, we can actually control when that firmware gets pushed out. So we're only doing updates when they're kind of like critical security updates or things that are really needed to address performance. So that way you're not getting like random firmware updates in the middle, every week that might cause operational issues the next day. There's also, ensuring that that can be done in a phased way. So maybe you'll roll out a firmware update to 1 or 2 chargers on a site, make sure it works, make sure there's no compatibility issues, test it out, and then do all the rest of the chargers. So all those types of things are, it's really important to understand which chargers can do that and which ones can't. And that's one of the things that, us doing both the development and then the operations and maintenance is we're really taking that whole life cycle view. And, the chargers that we typically use are definitely not the cheapest ones available. In fact, I would say they're a little bit maybe more capital intensive, but we've found that they have a significantly lower life cycle cost and really help us to hit those high uptimes that are in our customer service level agreements. And so it's really important to make sure that you look into that, look at how it'll all come together and, how that can be managed for the whole, 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Okay, so I think really we've listed here again some key takeaways, but the managed solution is something that often is not a big part of the planning process, and really want to highlight the importance of this and really ensuring that this is a well thought out as part of your decision making when it comes to ensuring longevity of the site and reliability of your charging solutions. So yeah, thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate that. So how about we move on to the next, which will be the final topic that we'll be covering before we hit some Q&A. And we're looking here at the investing upfront for the long-term savings. So Jeremy, you're going to cover this one, and I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. As we stated, it depends on the site. Every site can have its own unique challenges. The cost to bring the power that you need to the site can vary, depending on site to site. Your infrastructure on the site can vary depending on what your needs are. But generally the costs are substantial. And I think, that is one of the big challenges of migrating to an EV fleet is it is a capital intensive investment that you must make. One of the benefits that Voltera offers the industry is we're able to actually front those capital costs for you, develop a site based on your specifications, manage your charging site, and hand it back to you as an operating expense versus you having to put all the cost of infrastructure out up front. It allows you to prioritize your investments in your fleet or other sustainable projects that you have at your organization. It lowers your overall financial risk because we're responsible for managing the site over the long term. So the upgrades of the charging equipment, the challenges that you may face, we own those challenges for you, and you have an ability to lower your risk because you know exactly what it's going to cost month to month for the duration of the lease term. We also help you future-proof, as Jeff said. Selecting the right charging equipment is really probably one of the most important things you can do to ensure that the charging equipment selected really matches the fleet and communicates and works well with the fleet. Voltera has two different options we offer. We can actually go buy a site for you and develop it, or we can actually do the system on your site and lease it back to you. So we can give you different flexible solutions that allow you to grow over time without making multiple investments. If you have a site, for example, and you want to develop it, we can do all that investigation up front to ensure that you can get that power to your site. And if you can't, we're going to tell you the challenges or how we get you over those challenges. And that's one of the biggest benefits. So I would encourage people, as you start to look at your long-term solution, look at what a lease site would do for you. Because at the end of the day, you have one partner, one person that's accountable for the EV charging system. And that takes a lot of headaches away from your day-to-day operations and day-to-day management, because you have one person that you get to talk to if something isn't working, and that does allow for that. Essentially, you get yourself a turnkey end-to-end solution, and that ultimately has a lower cost than trying to do it yourself. So I would just encourage people to consider it. I'm not saying you have to do it, but definitely consider it. It's a very valuable solution that you should think through as to whether or not it fits. Brian, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think, when we did ours, we didn't have this as an opportunity. It just wasn't even a glimmer in anybody's eye at the time. And I think in terms of what you just talked about, you need to do that math. Look at the solutions that Jeremy just mentioned and compare them to pursuing a path that we did at Stanford back in the day because we didn't have any other choice. And see what works out best. Ideally, you want a space that you have control over for a very long time. There's going to be significant capital investment in that space to charge these buses. You want that available to you. And if you don't have the opportunity to get that space, then partnering to get it makes a lot of sense. We're fortunate that we have space at Stanford that we've been able to dedicate to this purpose for the time that we've had the electric buses, and we believe it'll stay that way for the foreseeable future. But in the event we grew, in the event that we wanted to go full electric with all the operations that we have, we'll be challenged to figure out how we can charge all those vehicles on our site. So, we'll be looking at all the different options that are out there, in the future when that presents itself. And I think you owe yourself that. I think it's nice that we have the opportunity to think about getting this infrastructure in place without it having to be done in the traditional format, which is getting all the CapEx yourself and then figuring out how to do it. That's one of the new neat features of EV buses is that it presents a whole new way of looking at their needs and infrastructure. And it's not the same as liquid-based fuels or natural gas. It's different. And it opens itself up to these sorts of opportunities. You can share chargers. You don't have to have a charger for every bus, and we don't. We have 41 buses and 24 chargers. So if you're in a lease space that other operators are using too, well, great. Then it's sort of like a shared parking lot, to put on my other hat there. And then you're making best use of all that infrastructure. So I think it's definitely something that, if at the time, 8 or 9 years ago, this was available, we would have definitely baked it into our recommendations and analyzed it accordingly.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the takeaways are listed here, but in summary, the concept of financial flexibility is there now. And this is a solution that really needs to be factored in. A lot of the feedback we get from the industry is the expense and the upfront capital, and there's solutions out there that don't cause you to hold back with your implementation. So with that financial flexibility, it really needs to be factored in, whether that's someone else acquiring the site for you, whether it's someone else providing leaseback scenarios. There's a lot of different options out there that are definitely worth considering as part of your decision-making process to convert your fleet to EV. So, yeah, I think that well said, team. Thank you, guys. I think we'll move over to Q&A. And it looks like we've got a couple of questions here in the chat, so we'll get to that. But I actually, before we go to those questions, I have a question for you, Jeff, and it relates back to the utility conversation we had earlier. And I'm thinking here, there's folks on the call that may have multiple sites in multiple states and therefore dealing with multiple utilities. Can you talk a little bit about how to deal with that complexity and how to deal with the challenge of call it utilities in the way that they all have, call it their own language or their own way of operating?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that?
I think I have about 6 or 7 different, standing utility calls on my calendar every single week. So that's one way to deal with it. But I think really getting teams that understand the requirements for the local utilities is really important. They all have different details on how documents need to be submitted for their review, different technical requirements for interconnection, and trying to balance all of those and understand all of them can be really challenging. So having somebody who's familiar with each of the requirements, in some cases we even have consultants working for us that are very used to certain utilities, and that's invaluable.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I do want to jump to these questions, and I'll come back to you guys if there's time for more questions. So the first comes from, actually, we got Tim, who's requested a couple of questions here. So, have you thought through on an on-site power development project in a DC coupled microgrid configuration that minimizes the interaction with an electrical utility? How does this pencil out financially with existing tax credits? And I'll open it up to the panel who feels like they want to take a run at this answer.
Yeah, I can take that one. So I see that as kind of 2 questions. Like, number one is, does a microgrid and on-site energy resources make sense? And if so, DC versus AC. We've looked at it for a lot of sites. I've done some sites with microgrids. The number one driver for whether or not it pencils is going to be when you're going to charge the vehicles and what the local utility rates are. In most cases where we're talking about transit and buses, it's off hours charging. And for the most part, that means that you're getting very cost-effective electricity commodity rates and perhaps no demand charge. And so it becomes very challenging to offset on-site solar, battery, even generators, for example, because your electricity is so cheap. In California, for example, with the latest programs there, if you export energy during the day, they're basically going to give you pennies on the dollar for it. So you'd need to put it all into storage, which becomes very expensive and becomes very hard to offset. But there's certainly some sites where it makes sense. And if you need resilience, it can also make sense. On the DC side, we've just generally found that limits your choice too much. You have different DC voltages anyway, so you always still need the conversion in there. And then you don't get the efficiency kind of gain that you were maybe expecting, thinking of doing the whole thing in DC.
Yeah. And Tim's actually got a follow-up question as well. Does the DOT or the FDA limit amount of percentage of funding it will provide for infrastructure costs? And does that require strategies to attract larger amounts of supplemental capital? Are public transit fleets open to private capital investment and ownership of infrastructure? Well, is anyone on the panel comfortable with answering that one? I can certainly say that as far as my experience, there are public transit fleets that are open to private capital investment. Voltera has been in conversations with those. Javier, I'm not sure if you've had any experience in agencies and conversations related to this. I know that there's obviously funding out there for vehicles and infrastructure, so you might want to.
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit, and I'm not on the FTA recipient, but obviously we live in that world. So I don't know that they limit the amount or percent of funding. You take the low note project right now, there's grants out there for the infrastructure bill where they're being funded to go out and supplement infrastructure and expansion and exactly what you guys are talking about here today. And as far as the capital, the private capital side, as far as I know, that's been happening for years. If you go back to the
Mhm.
clean energy group and the CNG side, right, where they'd come in and they'd provide your CNG fueling station and you sign an agreement and then they just pay for the operation side. So no, I mean, anytime you can attract large amounts of supplemental capital is a good thing, whether you're
Yeah.
pursuing grants or whatnot. But I don't think in that question there's anything that a FTA recipient isn't able to do, or a DOT with the local funds, right? So that would be the 80-20 match there, I believe
Yeah.
Tim's thinking about.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to also make a note here in recognizing the time that this recording will be made available to everyone who's been part of the call. So just want to let you know that you will be able to use this as a resource. But let's just try to jump in and answer John's question here. John asks, does Voltera work with the local CMs to construct EV infrastructure where they have not operated within that area in the past? So, Jeff, you want to answer that?
Yeah, so we have a pretty good stable of both national and local contractors and CMs, and so we think we can hit pretty well most markets. If it's somewhere we hadn't been before, we're probably more likely to engage one of our national vendors, but it does depend a little bit on the market. We have areas where we're looking at getting into. We've been teeing up conversations with CMs as well. So I think we're pretty well set to deliver projects most places in the US.
And John's involved.
Certainly, if as an owner, somebody had a specific contractor that they really like to see, we would certainly entertain working with them as well.
And Jeff, John resides in Boston, so that'll give you a little frame of reference.
Great.
All right. Well, yeah, in the interest of time, I think, let me be very quick with the summary. There's obviously a lot of information on this particular slide, so I won't read through it. But I think as far as to summarize today's webinar, I think real takeaway, hopefully for those listening in, is that there really are experts out there who can support you throughout the whole process. You have the ability to use resources. You've got trailblazers out there, such as Stanford, who have gone out and figured out a lot of the challenges on their own and can offer some great advice and be a resource to you. And then you've also got great organizations like Gillig, who have developed an excellent solutions when it comes to the vehicle side of it, and are also well rehearsed in helping support you work through the challenges with EV implementation. But on top of that, there's a lot of different ways of approaching this, and there's a lot of resources to help you figure this out. So really appreciate everyone's time, and thank you for joining us. And just want to finish off by mentioning that if you do go ahead and reach out to Voltera's website, you'll be able to sign up and receive a lot of what we've talked about. Voltera's created playbooks for all aspects of what we've discussed today, and help you really work through and in detail the necessary steps. So yeah, again, thank you to all of our panelists. I really appreciate you participating and for a terrific conversation. And I'm sure everyone who joined got a great value out of it. So thank you to everyone, and have a great day.
All right, Matt, thanks.
Thank you.